Okay, so for 65 degrees, what you want to do is draw your horizontal. So take your protractor and take the straight edge part of your protractor and draw a horizontal line. Okay, the length doesn't matter, just draw horizontal. So that's our horizontal that I mentioned in our steps. Okay, and then you decide which side you want to have your vertex on, either the left or the right side of the horizontal. So I'm going to use the right side as my horizontal. And then I'm going to take my protractor, and each protractor is different. So this protractor has actually like a little hole in the center, and that's what you can use to line up your protractor with the vertex. Some protractors don't, they might just have a little mark. So some protractors vary. So this protractor that we have in class has a little hole that we can use to line up the vertex, and then you want to line up your horizontal with 0 degrees. So since my vertex is on the right side, then I follow my horizontal, and if I go left, notice how you have some numbers on the top and the bottom row of your protractor. So when you're measuring, you want to locate 0 degrees. So if you try to use the bottom row, notice how it says 170. The next value would be 180. So that means we're not going to use the bottom row. We have to use the top row. So 0 degrees would be at the top row. Okay, so we're going to measure clockwise and go all the way to 65 degrees. So locate 65 degrees, and I'm going to draw a little mark at 65 degrees. To indicate where 65 degrees would be. And then from my vertex, I go to that mark. Okay, and I'm not going to draw a ray all the way to that mark. The mark is just there to indicate that that's where 65 degrees would be. Any ray that I draw along this line here is going to be 65 degrees no matter what. So I can just draw a little segment there, and then I'm going to put arrows on both ends. So remember that an angle is formed by 2 rays. So there are my 2 rays. And then 65 degrees, since I measured clockwise, I indicate that I measured clockwise in that angle, and then I label it as 65 degrees. Okay, so here's the vertex. The horizontal was the first side of my angle. And then the second side of my angle is the ray that I drew from the vertex to where that mark was. Okay, so there's my second side. Okay, so for part B, again, draw your horizontal. Okay, now I'm going to label my vertex. Now, if I use the right side of my horizontal as my vertex, the problem is that 125, when I make the mark, it's going to be off the paper. So I'm going to use the left side this time as my vertex. So I'm going to use the left side as my horizontal as the vertex. Then I'm going to line up my protractor with the vertex and the horizontal. Okay, so I've lined it up. My horizontal, if I go to the right, notice how I have numbers in the bottom row and top row. So you are always looking to line up your horizontal with 0 degrees. Okay, so 0 degrees would be right before 10 degrees. It wouldn't be after 170 degrees. So watch out for that. So 0 degrees, that means I'm going to use the bottom row to measure the angle. And I'm going to move counterclockwise all the way to 125. And I'm going to make a mark. So here's 120, so 125. So I'm going to put a mark there to indicate where 125 degrees would be. Then I take my vertex and line it up with that mark, and I draw a ray. I don't have to go all the way to that mark, okay? Because anywhere along that ray, the measure of the angle is going to be 125 degrees. Okay, so I label my other side of my horizontal with an arrow, and I measured counterclockwise 125 degrees. Okay, number 2. Okay, we're going to draw an angle that's 155 degrees, so draw your horizontal. Okay, label your vertex. So I'm going to use the right side as my vertex. Okay, so I'm going to line up my protractor with my vertex and with my horizontal. So now I locate, since 0 degrees would be using the top row, since my horizontal is lined up with 0 degrees, that means I'm going to use the top row and then go all the way to 155, which I know goes into the other part of the problem, part B, but that's okay. So I'm going to just mark where 155 degrees would be, and then from my vertex to that mark, I'm going to draw a ray. You don't have to go all the way to that mark. So I'm just going to draw a smaller ray. Draw my arrows at the end of both sides. So that angle I measured clockwise, and it was 155 degrees. Okay, B, 25 degrees. Okay, so draw your horizontal. Okay, I'm going to use the left side as my vertex this time, just to practice using both sides of the horizontal. So I line up my protractor with the vertex and with 0 degrees. So 0 degrees would be using the bottom row. So then I go to 25 degrees. I put a mark indicating where 25 degrees would be. And I draw a ray from my vertex to that mark. And I draw my arrows so that I indicate the rays on the two sides of the angle. And I measured counterclockwise 25 degrees. Okay, so next page. Now we're going to be measuring angles on page 15. So you're going to use a protractor to find the measure of each angle and then write the classification, whether the angle is acute, obtuse, or right or straight. So number 3, B is the vertex. So you want to line up your protractor with the vertex and one of the sides of the angle. So I'm going to use side BC. So I'm lining up my protractor with the vertex, and BC is my horizontal. Line that up with 0 degrees. So that means I'm going to be using the bottom row of numbers. So I'm going to measure counterclockwise. Okay, so that angle, the other side ends up at exactly 90 degrees. Okay, so this angle is 90 degrees. And remember, we use a box to indicate that an angle is 90 degrees. So if you notice here, it says M and then there's what looks like a less than sign. Actually, the M, the lowercase cursive m, means measure. So it's a shorthand notation for the measure of angle. So that's actually the angle symbol, ABC. So we're measuring angle ABC, and that measure was 90 degrees. Okay, now because the angle is exactly 90 degrees, that means this would be a right angle. Okay, number 4. So I'm going to line up my protractor with the vertex, and I'm going to use ray BC as my horizontal again. So I'm going to line that BC with 0 degrees. So that means I'm going to be using the bottom row to measure my angle. So if I use the bottom row, I'm going to be going counterclockwise to the other ray, and that would be 30 degrees. So the angle would be 30 degrees. And notice how, if you look, when you measure this angle, you have 30 and 150. So if you're confused as to which measure to use, think about if this angle were 150 degrees, it would have to be an obtuse angle. And this angle doesn't look very obtuse. Okay, this angle is an acute angle. So it wouldn't be 150 degrees, so it would have to be 30 degrees. Okay, so the measure of this angle, ABC, is 30 degrees. And because it's 30 degrees, it's an acute angle. Okay, number 5. Okay, so line up your protractor with your vertex. Okay, so on number 5, line up your protractor with the vertex and side BC with your with 0 degrees. So there's 0, so we're going to be using the bottom row, and we're going counterclockwise. So this angle here is going to be 100 degrees. Okay, so it wouldn't be 80 degrees because if you look at the angle, it doesn't look like it's an acute angle. It looks more of an obtuse angle. So this angle is 100 degrees. So the measure of angle ABC is 100 degrees, and it would be obtuse. Okay, number 6. So line up your vertex with your protractor. You might have to turn your paper around sometimes. So I'm going to use BA this time as my horizontal and line it up with 0 degrees, and then B is the center of my protractor with the vertex. So I'm going to measure clockwise because my horizontal, if you notice where the arrow is pointing, it's to line it up with 0 degrees. That means I have to use the top row. So I go clockwise, and then this would be 70 degrees. Okay, so it wouldn't be 110 because if you look at the angle, it's not obtuse, it's an acute angle. So it wouldn't be 110, so it'd be 70 degrees. Okay, so then I write the measure of angle ABC is 70 degrees, and its classification would be acute because it's less than 90. Okay, number 5. Actually, sorry, number 7.
It's super blurry.
I'm going to fix it. Okay, so in number 7, we have an angle here. This type of angle, when it forms a straight line, it's just a straight angle, and it measures 180 degrees. So if you were to measure this with a protractor, if it forms a straight line, it's 180 degrees. So this would be classified as a straight angle. Okay, and then number 8, you might have to turn your paper around. We're not going to be measuring angles that are more than 180 degrees. So if you're like looking at it and you're like, oh, it's 180, it's more than 180, that would be incorrect because we're not going to discuss angles that are more than 180 in this class. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to use BC as my horizontal, and I'm going to line up my vertex B. So if I move my protractor around, then I have BC as my horizontal. Line it up with 0 degrees. That means I'm going to be using the bottom row. And I go counterclockwise, and it looks like it's going to be 165 degrees. Okay. So this angle is 165. Okay, so the measure of angle ABC would be 165 degrees, and the classification would be an obtuse angle. Okay, so this is lesson 6.0b. It should be a review. Now we're going to move on to lesson 6.0c.